Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sunday service. We'd like to welcome especially our guests, those who are staying at the Expanding Light, and also our guests who are watching over the internet. I'll read this morning from Rays of the One Light, which are weekly commentaries on the parallel passages of the Bible and Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. This morning the topic is intuition is simple, the intellect is complex. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 10, we read a passage that Yogananda often quoted. And they brought young children to him, that he should touch them, and his disciples rebuked those who brought them. But when Jesus saw it, he was much displeased, and said unto them, Suffer little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of God. Verily I say unto you, whosoever shall not receive the kingdom of God as a little child, he shall not enter therein. It has often been noted that a critical attitude tends to paralyze creativity. Good critics, for example, seldom produce works of creative genius, though their creations may be intellectually clever. The intellect separates, it analyzes, then puts things together again, piece by piece. Intellect lacks intuition's flow, which descends smoothly like a river from the superconsciousness. Paramahansa Yogananda described intuition as the soul's power of knowing God. To receive the kingdom of God, Jesus was saying, one must do so with the openness and trust of a little child. Intellectuals may object to this statement by saying, but there must also be discrimination. You wouldn't want a person to be so open-minded that his brain falls out. The truth is, however, that the intellect can be fooled, even when it does its best to discriminate wisely. Only intuition is capable of penetrating to the heart of a matter and knowing the truth from falsehood. It was the clear understanding of a child, not the elaborately persuaded intellects of his elders, that enabled the child in the Hans Christian Andersen story to cry out in surprise, "Why isn't the emperor wearing any clothes?" Therefore it was that Sri Krishna said in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, to you who are free from the carping spirit, I shall now reveal wisdom sublime. Grasping it with your mind and perceiving it by intuitive realization, you shall escape the evils of delusion. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning, everyone. And I also want to welcome you. For those who don't know us, my name is Devi. This is my husband, Jyotish. And we are very happy to be with you this morning. We have a wonderful topic. I'm going to start by reading from the newly published Whispers from Eternity. And this one, our passage this week is Demand for the Rising of the Aurora of Intuition. Infinite Spirit, thy presence is hidden equally behind the warm rays of the sun and the cool light of the moon. Those lights, though welcome and wonderful, reveal only Mother Nature's splendor in matter. They reveal not thee. To me, they are therefore darkness. Thy all-revealing, majestic and supreme light shines not on, but from within. the center of everything, therefore creating no shadows. Shadows in this world reduce light itself to non-light. In theory, I have known this. Now, Lord, take all darkness away from me. Wherever I sit with eyes shut, enclosed in my own darkness, cause to blaze upon me in glory the aurora of intuition, that suffused in its light, I may gaze raptly on thee with worshiping eyes. Well, this subject of intuition, you hear a lot about it, and it seems interesting, but really, if we understand it properly, we can, as they say, drill down and understand that it is through deepening our understanding of how to perceive the world intuitively that we grow closer to God, that we develop spiritually. I think most of us have the experience. I know I certainly did when I was a child. I remember being in a state of joy most of the time, and I remember watching everyone around me, watching my parents and the other people in my life, but I always felt distant from them, like it wasn't my world, it was their world. And then we, as we all do, we grow up and we begin our intellectual training, begin going to school. And I tuned in pretty quickly to the fact that if you go and sit in a room and you listen to what people tell you and you write it down, and then they give you a piece of paper and they ask you what they told you and you write it back down, you get really good grades. And so I did this for many, many years through high school and college, and would sit there and people would tell me what someone had told them and they had written down, and I would tell them the same thing back. But little by little I started realizing they don't really know what they're talking about, and I sure don't know what I'm talking about. But I didn't know where to look for anything, how to find it. And I could recite medieval French poetry, I could tell you Chaucer in ancient English, and I knew all how the Russian Revolution started and all the details that they teach you in college that you walk away from and you think, what in the world was that all about? But after my third year of college, and I was an honor student, you know, all that, I could do it well, but I knew in my heart it didn't have any value. And after my junior year of college, I went to visit my brother who lived in Los Angeles. And he was a grad student at UCLA in medieval European history, and that was sort of the milieu I grew up in. But he took me somewhere. And he took me to this very pretty park out by the ocean near Pacific Palisades. And it had a beautiful lake in the middle, and there were these swans, and they were swimming there, and there was a little boathouse. And I thought, this is really a nice place. What is this? And he said, I don't know, I just like to come here. So there it was. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, this is Lake Shrine in Pacific Palisades, one of Yogananda's beautiful sacred shrine areas in the Los Angeles area. And then I went back for my final year of school. And by this time, I just thought, there's got to be something else. And that year, my last semester, someone gave me the autobiography of a yogi to read. And I started reading it. And it wasn't anything like the books I had been reading in college. It wasn't anything like Schopenhauer or Kierkegaard, these great, brilliant minds. It was simple, and it was filled with joy. And it was just the way I used to feel when I was a child, where I could perceive things directly, not through my mind. And I started meditating. And then a few months later, someone sent me a little brochure, probably one of the 50 existing in the world, about a Nanda meditation retreat. This was 1969. And I made my way out here from Madison, Wisconsin. And I met Swami Kriyananda, and I heard him lecture. And he was so unlike anyone I had ever met before. He knew, and I knew he knew. And I knew what he knew I wanted. he spoke from inner knowledge, he spoke from inner realization, and he taught us the path of yoga, and he taught us the path of meditation, and he taught us discipleship. And I knew that my education had begun, and everything else had just been marking time till I could get to that point where karmically I was ready to receive true understanding and true knowledge. And the years have gone by, and one practices meditation, one tries to tune into discipleship, and little by little, that sense of childlike joy of being able to see the world, not from the outside, but to see it from within, to experience it from within, to feel and to feel God's presence, and to look back on your life and know that that divine guide from within has been there every step of the way, that we stopped listening for whatever reason. And I remember once, after I was at Ananda for a number of years, I went back to visit my mother and father, who were living in St. Louis, Missouri at the time. And I went for a little walk in our neighborhood, and Master told us to memorize his poem, Samadhi, not just mentally, and I'm sure many of you here, Master told all his disciples to commit it to memory. And it's not like memorizing who were the key players in the Russian Revolution, because you can't do it with your mind. And I find very interestingly, whenever I try to mentally repeat it, if I'm only in a mental state, I can't remember it. But if I go into my heart, then the whole poem is there. And so one day I was visiting back in St. Louis, and just missing my spiritual family here at Ananda, missing this life here. And I was going for a walk on this little suburban neighborhood, and I was mentally repeating Samadhi, and my eyes were kind of half closed. I was just by myself. And I got to that line that says, "A sparrow, a grain of sand, falls not without my sight." And just then my foot kind of touched on something, and I looked down. There was a little dead sparrow that had fallen. And just as I said those lines, "The sparrow falls not without my sight," and there it was. And I knew that God was watching me just as he was watching that little sparrow that had fallen down. But some years later, recently, I was able to work on edit a book of talks by Swami Kriyananda called Intuition for Starters, and I highly recommend it. It just tells you the whole science and art of developing your own intuition and why it's important. Because our lives are, every one of us, many times a day, we have to make decisions. What should I do? When should I leave? What should I say? How to help this person? How to get back at this person? Whatever it might be. But all the time we're needing to find direction and answers. And it's through this art of developing our own awareness from within that we can understand, just as it said in that beautiful passage, the light of intuition doesn't shine on things, it is illuminated from within. And I watch so often, this summer we've had the great blessing of having Swami Kriyananda with us. And there have been times at public gatherings where people come up to meet him for his blessings, and we sit near him because his hearing isn't very good and he can't hear what people are saying, so we make sure he can hear. But watching what he does, it's like a beam of light comes from his consciousness and ignites the divine light within whoever is in his purview. And then they begin glowing with that light from within. And that's the power of sainthood. That's the power of people who live in that state of divine perception. And the reason we seek them out is because they awaken that within us. And then we think, this is who I am. I'm not my limitations. I'm not my darkness. I'm not my shadows. I'm the light. That's all that I am. And everything else, like all the things I learned in college, it just really is nothing. It has no value to it. And all those parts of us, our social security number and our address and our infinite number of cell phone numbers and emails and et cetera, it's nothing. It's not who we are. At the end of this summer also, I had a remarkable experience, something personal, quite personal, that I never expected. My brother, who I was quite close to as a child, but our lives have gone in very different directions, and he still lives in Los Angeles, and but has only been here at Tuananda 3 or 4 times in the 40 years that I've been here. But he came up this summer, and Swamiji said, "Why don't you bring him down for tea?" And my brother's a very nice man. He may even be watching this, because sometimes he watches our talks. But he said he came in to see Swamiji, and Swami was so dear with him. And he looked at him and he said, "You look to me like an old friend." And I saw my brother's eyes open up in such a way that I had never seen him in his whole life, because he's led just a life in the business world. And there was, I saw that part of him that I remembered from when we were children. And there it was. And he said to Swamiji, and it just was beyond anything I expected would happen. He said, "Swami, and he's never spoken with him before in his life. He said, "You've lived such a remarkable life. You've helped so many people. And the life you've given to my sister, she never could have had on her own. Thank you." And I just was struck dumb to watch this happening. And then when my brother left, he looked at Swamiji and he said, "Goodbye, old friend." And I knew there were so many things going on there. And one of them was the weaving together of past, present, and future in divine light into the eternal now. And the ability to live in that state comes from Swami was reflecting the light of my brother's soul, which no one else had ever done for him. And he felt it, and he knew it, and it changed him. And but in this book, Swami talks about how we develop that intuition within ourselves, because all the time we're needing to know, how do I live this life? What is real? What is false? What is dharma? What is right action? What is adharma? And this power to develop our intuitive perception there's a science to it, based deeply in the science of Raja Yoga, in the science of the chakras, the inner centers of perception. And Swami teaches us from Master that by concentrating deeply at the spiritual eye, and projecting your thoughts there, if you have a question, if you want to understand a situation or a person, clearly perceive it, clearly visualize it, conceptualize it at the point between the eyebrows, project that thought out. And in the stillness of meditation, then feel in the heart center, or as they say in Sanskrit, the Anahata chakra. This is the center of receptivity. This is the center where we can feel the whispers from eternity, we can feel God's guidance, and feel with calmness, with impartiality, the truth of who you are, and of any given question that you have, direction that you're seeking. And it's very simple, but the importance of it, it's not just to know, should I go to town after lunch today or not? It's developing your own ability to open yourself up and to receive and to feel God's presence. And the key words that Swami talks about are impartiality, not to say, oh, it's got to be this, it's got to be that. I know you're going to come to me today. I know this is what's going to be. But just totally impartial, totally without any slant on the situation. I want life to be this way. I don't want it to be that way. Likes and dislikes. The great exponent of yoga, Patanjali, said that yoga, which means union with God, is the neutralization of the likes and the dislikes, of that feeling nature. So to walk in impartiality without saying, life must give me this must happen. If my expectations are not met, I'm going to manipulate the world until they are met, and then I'll be happy. That's how most of us live our lives. And it never works. Manipulation of the outward world, and we can do it if we work hard at it long enough, will be like water through our hands. Maybe we'll be able to change the world and change people and get them to behave or do what we want, but we won't find the fulfillment we're looking for through that process. But to be impartial, to be objective, to be calm, whatever happens, just to have that little bit and say, God, this is from you. This is from you. And to find the joy in that. To look at life impartially, feel God's guidance, and then when you feel His guidance, even if it's not what you wanted, if you feel this is right, then to go deeper in that experience and feel the joy. We've had so many, many experiences in our life at Ananda where life didn't give us what we wanted. We've had forest fires and lawsuits and all sorts of things that most people don't have to go through. But even in the worst of times, there was always this understanding. I remember, for example, after the forest fire, when the community was burnt down, and the wisdom we got from that, the lessons we learned from that, the ability to find security with nothing material, but the security from within, that was intuitively perceiving that none of this really matters. Jyotish and I, as I mentioned, we're married, and we had a little new baby at the time of the forest fire, 10 days old. And we lost everything we had. We had absolutely nothing. And my mind, I could feel, was perhaps one could say not absolutely settled at that moment. But I just prayed so hard, and I said, God, how are we going to make it through this? What can I do? And I intuitively felt in my heart, and it was something I've carried with me all these many years after, your sense of home, your sense of security, your sense of family is not something external. It took Swami many years later to write the song, Home is a Green Hill, Home is a Wind. And that's what I felt. I felt if you have nothing, if you live under a tree, that's not going to impede your ability to create a sense of home for this child. And it was just the most marvelous thing, because it wasn't book learning, and it wasn't from somebody telling me, but it was the intuitive perception born of dire necessity, how to carry on through this. And for most of us, we move in and out of that state of being aware of that joy, that intuitive perception. But the real rub of it comes down, the real core of it. How do we do it all the time? It's not enough just to say, okay, today I'll be even-minded and cheerful, but tomorrow I'll let up a little bit. It's how to do it in all circumstances. And I was talking recently with someone who's going through a test, and emotions, a lot of them worked up, and I said, you have to find the joy all the time. And she said, but how? And I said, it's an act of willpower. You choose it, and you choose it over and over again. And it was very interesting, because last week, Swamiji gave Sunday service. If you didn't see it, it's up on our homepage on our internet. It was a wonderful service. But he told a story that I'd heard many times before, but somehow it really sunk in last week, where he said he had been, when he was a young monk living in his guru's ashram, he was is a direct disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda, And this year, as many of you know, we're celebrating his 60th anniversary of discipleship. So he was a young monk. He'd been with Master a couple of years. And he was down at Mount Washington, and Yogananda was farther south at Encinitas, and he hadn't seen him for several weeks, and he was really, really missing him. And he just, he made up some excuse to go to Encinitas just so he could see if he could see his guru. And as soon as Yogananda saw him, he took his hand, he said, "I've been missing you." And he took him up into his room, and they had a little time together, and then Kriyananda went out with the other monks. And that evening after meditation, one of the monks was, and this is a hard teaching. As I tell you this story, I realize you may reject it, but I still want to tell you, because there'll be times when you will be able to live it. So that night, he was just talking quietly with some of the other monks, and one of the other monks just told him about a book he was reading. Not a bad book, just a book. But Swami said, even that conversation, he had been in such a state of yearning, of perception of his guru's love for him, even coming down to the level of talking about a worldly novel, he could feel his consciousness slip a little bit. And the next day when Yogananda saw him, he took his hands and he said, "I have missed you," meaning I've been here, but you haven't. And this is a hard teaching. It's hard to keep your mind always moving towards the light. It's hard to push away simple, enjoyable things of this world. But be very mindful. It's not that you can never read a novel. It's not that you can never see a video. It's not that you can never talk with your friends. But be very mindful intuitively. What am I feeling? Is my consciousness dropping? And if it is, cut it off like that. I know with Swamiji, we get to share with him little conversations, and they're very light, about nothing much substantial. But every once in a while I'll notice, he'll say, as it says in the Gita, and out of nowhere. And I think, the vibration slipped a little bit, and he's bringing it back up. Another thing to be very, very mindful of, and this is easier to deal with, but as it's said in the Gita, the carping spirit, I find in my own self so often that when I slip into a critical attitude about anything, even if it's well-deserved, even if it was maybe you go somewhere and it's a terrible meal, you go to someone's house for dinner, it's terrible. This doesn't, honest to God, this doesn't happen at Anand, everyone here is, but maybe you go somewhere, but just to find something good in that experience, because it's in the carping spirit that we are pulled down from the intuitive perception of the light in everything, and we experience the fragmented world of delusion. I remember something that happened. It was very interesting. Many years ago, I was living up at the meditation retreat, and Swamiji and two other people drove up for a meeting they were having it was an organizational meeting. And I was just working in the kitchen at the time, and I was going to prepare dinner for the group, but Swami just drove up, and he had this very lovely blue cardigan wool sweater on, and he got out of the car, and we were standing there to greet him, and this light just came out of him. And I was young, and I hadn't been here very long, but I could see that light just way, way flooding the whole area. And I said to him in my ignorance, "Swami, what a beautiful sweater." And he laughed. But then one of the other people there and then Swami said, "What are you making for dinner?" And I told him. And one of the other people there made some kind of a sarcastic comment. And as soon as they made that comment, the light was gone. I didn't even make it. But they just made a critical comment about, it's probably going to be Jerusalem Archix or something like that. And the light was gone. And I thought, that's very interesting. So watch the people around you. Avoid those who pull your consciousness down. The aurora of intuition is very delicate. at first, until it's established within you. And then it becomes the light that shines in the darkness, that nothing can diminish. But in the beginning, as you ask God for His guidance, as you try to intuitively feel, not with your mind, but with the openness and receptivity of a child. Master's most advanced disciple was a man, Rajarsi Janakananda. He was a self-made millionaire, but in Master's presence, he was a little child. Master called him his little one. And he was always silent in Master's presence. And he said, the secret of spiritual growth is receptivity, to be open all the time to the light of others, see that light in them, no matter how much they try to obscure it. That's the gift Swami has given to all of us. It's the gift Master gave to him, and by extension, millions of people. Dwell in that light. Eliminate, eschew from your mind the carping spirit, the critical nature that sees the flaws in the world around you. To the extent you do that, you cut off the light dramatically. There are stories from famous athletes, very interesting. I've read about them, both basketball players, football players, who sometimes during the game go into a state of heightened awareness where they feel like they're watching the court or watching the field, and they know where everyone is, and they know where everyone's going to move to, and they know where the ball is going to be thrown. But they say always what breaks that awareness is when there's some violence or some negative energy or some harsh words, and then it's gone. So watch that in yourself. We live in a world of light and shadows, but we can choose the light, and we can choose the joy, and we can choose it all the time, not some of the time when people are behaving as we would want them to. But no matter what the world hands us, if it hands us our head on a platter, nevertheless, live in that aura of intuitive joy where you look all around you and you see this world is filled with God's peace, filled with God's grace. And I know because that peace and that grace had their source in myself. In the beautiful chapter, I'll close with this thought, in the beautiful chapter in Autobiography of a Yogi, An Experience in Cosmic Consciousness, where Yogananda describes this experience and where the poem Samadhi first appears. He talks about his being in his guru's ashram, and his guru touched him, tapped him lightly on the chest. And then the world of matter melted away, and he could see 360 degrees all around him. He could see beyond the village. His awareness kept expanding and expanding until he said, the universe was like the lights. I could see it floating in space, like the lights of a city seen in a distance. And I realized then that the center of all creation was a point of intuitive perception within the human heart. So let us nurture that light. Let us develop that light. Let us live in an expanded awareness that the joy and grace and beauty of all creation resides within us.